Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is Basil Rathbone inviting you to join me beyond the green door. There are many odd stories in the newspapers. Today we'll retrace one to its conclusion, beyond the green door. Mrs. Curlew read the following advertisement in a California newspaper. Retired British Army Major wishes to meet attractive woman with private income, object matrimony, correspondent owns extensive lands in Kenya. Mrs. Curlew was a cheerful and attractive woman in her 40s, recently widowed, and possessing an assured income from her late husband's stocks. She wrote to the Major describing herself, her income, and her ranch in California. The Major replied, and a meeting was arranged. The Major was in his 60s, and he might have stepped out of the pages of Kipling. He was tall, very erect, moustached, and filled with endless stories about the Northwest frontier. Mrs. Curlew found him perfect, especially since he didn't have a single living relative. They were married within a month, and they made out mutual wills in each other's favor. That was Mrs. Curlew's idea, and the Major agreed it was sensible. Mrs. Curlew had seen no reason to tell the Major that he was her fifth husband, all the others having died suddenly and unexpectedly through causes unknown. In truth, Mrs. Curlew was a poisoner. But her method was so ingenious that no coroner had been able to bring any evidence against her. The police had their suspicions, of course, but they could prove nothing. Still, Mrs. Curlew considered her future very carefully after her marriage to the Major. One could not discount the police and their new scientific methods, and the Major was a dear man, although terribly staid and conventional. Perhaps this time it would be best to, stay quietly married. Mrs. Curlew might have tried if it hadn't been for the Major. He would forever drone on about the Pathan tribesmen he had fought, the murder cults he had uncovered, and the secret poisons which Indian sorcerers knew. All this talk of murder was simply too much for Mrs. Curlew. Another death would look bad, of course. The police would never leave her alone. But she could leave the country as soon as the investigation was over, yes. Comforted by this thought, she began her preparations. They involved 5 common household items and a cup of delicious Darjeeling tea. Some months later, an advertisement appeared in a Sydney, Australia newspaper. It read, "Retired British Army Major wishes to meet attractive woman with private income. Object matrimony. Correspondent owns extensive lands in Kenya and America." Well, the Major is a pleasant old fellow. He is a little dull with his interminable stories of Pathan tribesmen, murder cults, and secret untraceable poisons. Amusingly enough, the Major never drinks a thing except bottled mineral water. It's a habit he acquired in India. But the Major is very polite. To spare a hostess any embarrassment, he skillfully pretends to drink anything put in front of him. And because of this, one never learns about his peculiarity until quite late in the acquaintanceship.